A teacher walks into a classroom, lights a cigarette, sits on the edge of the desk, and tells a student to stop crying, or he will give them something to cry about. No parent meeting, no human resources complaint, no letter from the school board. That was just a Tuesday in 1975. If someone went to school in the 1970s, they remember exactly what teachers could get away with. And if they told their kids about it today, their kids would not believe a word of it. This was a different era in education. Teachers had authority that bordered on absolute. Parents sided with the school. Administrators stayed out of the way. And the rules that govern modern classrooms simply did not exist. What happened inside those four walls was between the teacher and the students, and what happened there would end careers, trigger lawsuits, and make national news if it happened today. Let us walk through what teachers actually did in the 1970s that would be completely unacceptable now. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it might explain why school felt so different back then. Let us step into that world. The first thing that would shock anyone walking into a 1970s classroom was the smoking. Teachers smoked. Not just in the teacher's lounge, though that room was a haze of cigarette smoke so thick you could barely see the coffee pot. Many teachers smoked in the classroom itself. A teacher grading papers at the desk with a cigarette burning in an ashtray was completely normal. Some teachers would step into the hallway for a quick drag between lessons. Others did not bother stepping anywhere. They just lit up. Students sat in rooms with no ventilation, breathing it all in. Nobody complained because there was nothing to complain about. Smoking was what adults did. The idea that secondhand smoke was barely entering public consciousness. Today, a teacher smoking anywhere on school property would be terminated immediately. Physical discipline was not just accepted in the 1970s, it was expected. Teachers kept paddles in their desks, wooden paddles sometimes with holes drilled through them. A student acting up in class could be taken into the hallway and paddled. This was not hidden or controversial. Parents knew it happened, and most parents approved. The phrase, "if you get in trouble at school, you will get it worse at home," was something nearly every child heard. Beyond paddling, teachers had other methods. Rulers across the knuckles for talking out of turn, grabbing a student by the ear and pulling them to the front of the class, a firm smack on the back of the head. Nuns in Catholic schools were particularly known for their discipline. These were not isolated incidents. This was everyday classroom management. Today, any physical contact with a student as punishment would result in immediate termination, potential criminal charges, and a career-ending investigation. Public humiliation was a standard teaching tool. If a student could not answer a question correctly, the teacher might make them stand in front of the class while other students answered. Dunce caps, while fading, were not completely gone. Teachers would read a student's poor test score aloud to the entire class. A student who misbehaved might be forced to write, "I will not talk in class" on the chalkboard 500 times while everyone watched. Some teachers made students sit in the corner facing the wall for the entire period. Others had students stand in the hallway where every passing class could see them. The intent was shame, and it worked. The psychological impact on children was not considered. The idea that humiliation could cause lasting emotional damage was not part of the conversation. Today, deliberately humiliating a student would violate school policy, trigger parent complaints, and likely result in disciplinary action against the teacher. Before we continue with more of what made classroom life in the 1970s so different from today, if you are enjoying this look back at how school really worked and want to explore more decades and stories from the past, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans grew up and how education has changed. Teachers in the 1970s had virtually no restrictions on what they said to students. A teacher could tell a student they were stupid, not in a roundabout way. Directly, they would say, "You are stupid" to children. They could tell a student they would never amount to anything. They could mock a student's appearance, their weight, their clothes, or their family situation. Sarcasm was a primary communication tool. A student who asked a question the teacher thought was obvious might be met with a response so cutting that the entire class would laugh. The teacher would laugh too. The emotional well-being of students was simply not a priority. Teachers were there to deliver information. How students felt about it was their own problem. Today, verbal abuse of students is grounds for termination, and schools have entire frameworks built around creating emotionally safe learning environments. The lack of accommodations for students with learning disabilities would be staggering by modern standards. Before the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, and even for years after, as schools slowly implemented it, students with dyslexia, ADHD, autism, or other learning differences were simply labeled as lazy, stupid, or troublemakers. A student who could not sit still was a discipline problem. A student who could not read at grade level was not trying hard enough. Teachers had no training in learning disabilities because the concept barely existed in practical classroom terms. Students who needed help were ignored, punished, or held back. Many were pushed out of school entirely. The idea of an individualized education plan, classroom accommodations, or specialized support was years away from being standard practice. Today, failing to accommodate a student with documented learning needs would violate federal law. Teachers in the 1970s frequently had inappropriate personal relationships with students that went far beyond professional boundaries. Male teachers commenting on the physical appearance of female students was common. A teacher might tell a teenage girl she looked nice, in a way that would immediately trigger an investigation today. Some teachers dated former students almost immediately after graduation. The lines between authority figure and personal relationship were blurred in ways that modern ethics policies exist specifically to prevent. Female students who reported uncomfortable behavior from male teachers were often dismissed or told they were overreacting. The concept of mandatory reporting did not exist in the way it does now. Today, any inappropriate comment or relationship with a student, current or recently former, would result in termination, loss of a teaching license, and potential criminal prosecution. Grading in the 1970s was entirely subjective, and teachers wielded grades as weapons. A teacher who did not like a student could simply give them lower grades. There was no rubric, no standardized assessment criteria, and very little oversight. If a teacher decided a student deserved a failing grade, that student failed. Challenging a grade meant challenging the teacher, and that rarely went well. Some teachers graded based on behavior as much as academic performance. A student who was quiet and obedient might receive higher marks than a more capable student who asked too many questions. Grade inflation for favored students and grade deflation for disliked ones happened with no accountability. Today, grading practices are documented, standardized, and subject to review. A teacher using grades as punishment would face serious professional consequences. The curriculum in the 1970s gave teachers enormous freedom, and some used it in ways that would be immediately flagged today. Teachers could introduce their personal, political, or religious views into lessons without consequence. A history teacher might present one perspective as absolute fact. A science teacher might dismiss evolution or present pseudoscience alongside legitimate curriculum. Some teachers used class time to lecture about their personal beliefs on topics completely unrelated to the subject they were supposed to be teaching. There was no standardized curriculum in the way there is now. What students learned depended heavily on which teacher they had. One classroom might receive rigorous education, while another down the hall got whatever the teacher felt like discussing that day. Today, curriculum standards, lesson plan reviews, and parental oversight make this kind of unstructured teaching unacceptable. Supervision of students was remarkably lax. Teachers would leave classrooms unattended for extended periods. Students were sent on errands across school grounds alone. Playground supervision was minimal, sometimes a single teacher watching hundreds of children. Field trips happened with almost no safety protocols. Students rode in the back of pickup trucks for school events. A teacher might take a group of students somewhere without signed permission slips, background-checked chaperones, or emergency action plans. The liability considerations that dominate modern education simply did not exist. If a student got hurt, the response was often to tell them to walk it off. School nurses handled everything from scraped knees to serious injuries with minimal documentation. Today, the duty of care standards for student supervision would make practices of the 1970s look negligent. What defined teaching in the 1970s was authority without accountability. Teachers had enormous power over children's daily lives and almost no oversight governing how they used it. Parents trusted teachers implicitly. Administrators deferred to teacher judgment. The systems of checks, documentation, and student protection that exist today had not been built yet. Some teachers were extraordinary, dedicated, passionate educators who shaped lives for the better. But the system also allowed teachers who should never have been in a classroom to operate without consequence for years. The protections that exist today, protections for students with disabilities, protections against physical punishment, protections against harassment and abuse, all of those came because someone lived through the 1970s and said, this has to change. For those who went to school during this era, the memories are vivid. The smell of chalk dust and cigarette smoke, the sound of a paddle hitting a desk as a warning, the teacher who could silence a room with a look. It was a different world, one that produced resilient people, but also one that left scars some still carry. For those with memories of this remarkable era in education, there is always more history to explore.